Hello, dear students. I hope you're doing very well. I have just decided to give you this lesson through, online platform. I mean, through this channel. Due to the fact that the university has been just closed because of some unwanted reasons. However, in the past, we talked a lot about the importance of cross-cultural communication, how communication take place between two different cultures, as long as each cultures, has its own value, has its own, interaction, non-verbal communication. Every single characteristics might be somehow different, right? So I still remember, just like yesterday, I just gave you this topic last time, and then you are supposed to read as much as you can in relation to this topic, which is the barriers to cross-cultural communication. Effective cross-cultural communicative with people who across culture is quite challenging. It is not easy. So there are so many barriers, and then we divided the class into some groups, and then each group was given a barrier, and then they were supposed to prepare some slides about these kind of barriers that take place between some different cultures. So let's go, and then we try our best to shed some lights on each barriers, and we try our best to provide some solution to overcome these barriers or these issues. Okay, when we talk about the barriers, that means there is something that prevent us to talk, to exchange ideas, to understand how the thing is going into different cultures. And then in here, as you can see, what is barrier across culture? Actually, incomplete information about general population leads to unintelligent decisions and insensitivity among across cultural communication. So when we talk about barriers in general, that means there are some misunderstanding, misinterpretation, things that do not let you go further to understand how that culture interact, how they live, how they coexist with each other. When you go to other culture, actually sometimes there are so many barriers that we try to discuss some today. They do not let you to move forward. They do not let you to understand how the thing is going in that culture. And then actually, if we do not overcome these barriers, then even if you know the language in a great way, actually you are still not able to understand that culture, because communication is a bridge to understand two different people. But actually, at the same time, if you are not willing to learn, if you are not willing to break this barrier, actually communication even is not going to happen. That's why we need to understand this barrier very carefully, so that we can understand that culture in detail, and then we are not going to bend some cultural values or anything that are that has a kind of value for that culture. So the first barrier that we're going to talk about today is the first barrier is ethnocentrism. We all have a natural tendency to look at other cultures through our own lenses. When we assess other culture, when we are involved, engaged with other culture to understand something, actually, if we do not take off these lenses, then it is not possible to understand that culture appropriately. When we create two different opponents, when we say we and versus them, that means you always prefer your own lifestyle. You always prefer your food, you always prefer your clothes, You always prefer your music. You always prefer the way we dance, the way we hang out, the way we do everything. And then when we create these two different sides, and then you create what? You create us versus them. And then when we create these two group, actually, something is gonna be in here that it doesn't let you to evaluate that culture in an appropriate way. So when you create these two groups, actually ethnocentrism happens. When what? When we implicitly believes our way of doing things and seeing things is the right and only way. As a result, we negatively judge behavior that do not conform to our world vision. So when we create these two different situation, when I believe that everything on my side is correct and everything is your side is incorrect, then that is where these barriers take place. So we always need to understand the fact that in order to solve this problem, we need to understand things as it is. Even if they eat, that kind of food that they want, then that's okay. For example, if you go to India, people would love to eat spicy food, then that's okay. That's the style of their life. If you go to Pakistan, people are wearing a style of clothes that maybe you are laughing at them, right? But then actually that's the way they live. We as Kurdish, we wear Kurdish clothes, then what? Actually, that's our identity. It's all good. We need to understand the fact, whatever they do, actually it is part of their culture. Okay, so before we go to a country, we usually, Google the country, right? So we try to collect some information in relation to that culture before we go there. And then sometimes we, specifically on social media, when people, go and find some specific detail about a country or a different culture, then they will find lots of negative things, right? Specifically stereotyping, value judgment about people, inadequate information about the people leads to unintelligent choices in the cross-cultural communication. So cultural stereotypes exaggerate or overgeneralize what we perceive about them and leads increased anxiety. For example, if we go to a country like Iran, okay, so we have heard that some people they say, okay, people from Iran are stingy or they're very mean. And then that might not be true unless you do not go there. They say, okay, you do not go to Turkey. Why? Because they are the vast majority of the people are very racist. And then maybe they say lots of things. For example, they say, oh, do not go to Baghdad. Why? Because Arabic people hates Kurdish people. And then I do not know. There are lots of different stereotypes that might not even true. So individuals are unique. You can never predict a person's behavior based on his or her nationality. Every single person in a culture is different. When we say, for example, Kurdish people are very angry. I have heard this a lot when I was outside this country. They say why Kurdish people are, we have heard this a lot. Kurdish are very good fighters. So this might not be true until you come here. For example, some people say, oh, people from America, they drink lots of wine, beer, or whatever. But what I want to say is this might not be true because, things are different from one person to another person. In order to overcome this barrier, we need to understand the fact that you need to go there. If you do not go there, you need to go and read the dependable sources, because nowadays there are lots of pages on social media that they share false information about that country or that particular culture, and then it might not be appropriate. So that's why you personally need to go to that culture, and then you need to collect information. If you are not able to go to that culture, you need to go and dig deeper to find appropriate detail about that culture. Otherwise, everything might not be true online. That's why stereotyping is really, really sensitive, because it doesn't let you go to that culture. Sometimes people have planned to go somewhere, but then they say, okay, I do not go to that country. Why? Because there are so many liars, because there are so many I don't know, people who are fighting, people who are stealing, people who are blah blah blah. But then these information might not be true. Okay, so that's why you need to do that by yourself. I mean, you need to go to read a lot by I mean, in too many different sources, like books, maybe, I don't know, some dependable websites, and then that's how we can avoid this barrier. Okay, so the third barrier is psychological barriers. Okay, so when we talk about psychological barriers, before I dive in, every single person has their own mood. Sometimes we personally do not have mood to talk at all. Sometimes when you go to the university, when you go to the market, when you want to introduce a topic, and then they don't want to talk to you. They're just bored. They are just I don't know, frightened. Sometimes they are anxious. They are sad, happy. It depends, right? So sometimes people do not have a good psychological situation to talk to you well, right? So every person's mind is unique, and communication does not work like that in machine or in numbers. If you have there is something in iOS mobile called Siri, right? Siri it's just a machine. They always respond to you in one specific way. But actually, human being is different, okay? So if they do not have a mood, they do not give you a positive response, okay? So human being is not like machine. It doesn't work like numbers, okay? So these people who are involved in the communication matters as much as they message. Example, if your boss doesn't trust you, he or she will only send selective information, which makes the communication ineffective. Imagine you go somewhere, okay, and then your manager does not have a kind of trust on you, and then that affect the way you communicate with that manager later. So these has affected you psychologically. So that's why we need to be very careful. If someone doesn't have a mood, you need to get back to that person later on or in another time. Why? Because that person psychologically is not ready to talk, and then that might happen in every single person. So sometimes I personally do not have a mood to go out, Sometimes I do not have a mood to eat. Sometimes I do not have a mood to dance. Sometimes we do not have a mood to communicate, Sometimes, it depends our own psychological situation. So if someone doesn't respond well, so imagine that this might be part of their psychological situation. Okay, so in order to overcome this, it would be better to understand the situation as it is, and then you can just come back later on to that person and then talk to them, because it's not in their hands. This is something like this is something psychological. Okay, so that's why it would be better to come back later on and then start talking again. Okay, so the fourth barrier is language. Wow, when we talk about language, the vast majority people in our culture, they have not traveled to meet other culture is because of this barrier. You know, language is the backbone of communication, is the backbone of understanding two different people in two different culture. That's why sometimes if you have heard this before, they say language is a bridge between two different culture. You know, if I go to Turkey, if I go to Italy, if I go to Singapore, you know, the only element that I can understand that culture is language. So language is considered as the most crucial barrier in cross-cultural communication. Since verbal communication is important in every context, the understanding of the meaning of words are also important. So we need to be very careful how we utter every single word, because sometimes, you know, sometimes things are very simple in your culture, but it is not in other culture. Specifically, the vast majority of the communication are conducted through nonverbal communication, right? Last time we said 93% are nonverbal communication. And then it is quite important to be very careful how we use our facial expression, how we use our fingers, how we use every single part of our body. Because sometimes maybe things are normal in your culture, but it is not normal for them. Sometimes, you know, this creates lots of problem, and then the communication will fail. So that's why when we communicate, when we use language, we need to be very careful how we say things. Otherwise, maybe lots of bad things will happen. So the communication will fail, misunderstanding will happen, then misinterpretation will happen again, and then maybe you will fight. You try to understand that culture, but then because of the language, as long as you were not able to deliver the message in an appropriate way, then the communication was just failed. So that's why you need to be very careful. You need to be aware what you say, how you say, and how you use your non-verbal communication. I mean your body language. So sometimes, people go somewhere and they use, a kind of non-verbal communication, and then maybe this deliver a message to them. Okay, so that's why we need to be very careful in this barrier. And then, for example, if I want to go to America, and then if I want to use a specific nonverbal communication like eye contact or my eyebrow, we talked about this last time, and then we need to know where and when we use this kind of communication. Okay, so the fifth barrier is geographical distance barrier. Okay, so people in my culture, if they want to go to another country like, Vietnam, America, the UK, or any other country, it is not easy for them as long as they are not able to get visa, for example. Okay, this is one of the barrier. And then through social media, through their smartphone, I know they can read something about their culture, they can get some ideas, they can get but then these kind of stuff are limited. It is not like the way you personally go to that culture and then get involved with the situation. Okay, so imagine if I want to go to Singapore. Okay, and then when I go there, actually I observe how people interact, how people eat, how people behave, how people communicate, how people dance, how people eat. This kind of stuff can be observed. We talked about being observant when we go to other cultures, because through this kind of through observation, we learn a lot of things. So that's why it would be always better to go to that culture personally, so that you'll learn a lot of things. Okay, but as I said in my previous class, 93% of our communication are nonverbal communication. And then if I do not go there personally, that 93% cannot be achieved. So that's why, in order to overcome this barrier, sometimes we go to those places that lots of people from other culture, comes. For example, we are allowed to go to Mecca. We are allowed to go to Turkey. We are allowed to go to some other countries. Okay, so in those countries we can meet, we get to know lots of other culture, and then we can understand, we can communicate with them, and then we can find as many information, as many detail as possible in relation to their culture. Okay, another barrier is conflict in values barrier. Okay, so cultural values are a series of principles and values passed on generation after generation by our ancestors. When we talk about values, actually every single culture, even sometimes every single person, has their own values, has their own beliefs. Beliefs and values are different from one person to another. For example, my belief is like that, and then my belief is like that. Sometimes in one family, there are some different beliefs, okay? So, like two members in that family believe in that way, then another two members in that family believe that way. And then for me, something is valuable, is considered as a value for me. And then for another two members, different. So that's why value is like iceberg. If you look at this picture, you understand. Okay, so culture in here is like the iceberg. So what you see are the behaviors in here. Okay, and those are influenced by the invisible values under the waterline. So sometimes we cannot see what is under this water. So that's why we need to understand the fact, if we want to perform well in that different culture, we need to understand their values. We need to understand their beliefs. We need to understand what kind of things are important for them. So this kind of stuff, they provide the right guidance to the people, which results in positive performances and behavior. So that's why before we move forward with that culture, it would be better to understand their values and beliefs first. For example, I go to India and I am Muslim, okay, and I know their belief is something. Then I need to respect that. This is their belief, and then this is a kind of this has a kind of value for them, even if our perspective is different. Then I need to respect that. Okay, so in order to overcome this barrier, we need to understand their value. We need to come and read this part. Okay, so once I know that these things has a kind of value for you, then I respect that. Because why? Because I want to be successful in the way that we want to talk, in my communication. Okay, so in my previous class, we talked about values. We said value is different from one culture to another culture, even one person to another person. And then a particular culture has multiple examples which are quite different from other cultures' example in nature. Here are the examples which can be observed in any culture. For example, norms, ritual and ceremonies, language, holiday, festivals. We have a lot, fashion, craft, lifestyle. For example, in here, let's talk about holidays. For us, for example, Bahar has a great value for us. When it's the beginning of the year, then that's something important for us. So if you talk about America, 4th of July for them is the Independence Day, so it is important for them. It has its own value for them, right? So if we talk about, for example, fashion, for us Kurdish clothes is really important. For Arabic people, maybe this dasha is important. If we talk about this kind of stuff, like the clothes that Pakistani people are wearing, then that's okay. That has a kind of value for them. Okay, so if we talk about beliefs, like if you go to India, you can find lots of different beliefs, right? If we have, in terms of knowledge, clothing, music, okay? If we talk about literature, these kind of stuff are all different, from one culture to culture. So even if, for example, some culture, they're proud of, their arts. For example, if you go to Italy, the vast majority of their people, they proud of their art. You cannot say, so what the hell is art? Art is something, and it is okay for you, is you are right, but for them it has its own value. So we need to respect these kind of gesture. That's the way they give credit for that kind of value. Okay, so the seventh barrier is misunderstanding barrier. So when we talk about misunderstanding, we talk about language. We talked about language barrier before. Okay, so language is the source of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is the foremost barrier to communication in a multicultural environment. When we are not able to deliver the message, then misunderstanding take place, right? So this is common among people of different cultural background whose value and beliefs vary. The variation in the different culture results in high level of anxiety and uncertainty and end up into a misunderstanding. So imagine that some people from some different culture are working together. For example, there is a factory in Germany, and then they have, like, I don't know, 10 different culture, people from 10 different culture, and then when they talk, sometimes we have, heard about how people are fighting in the UK. As long as you have too many friends and family, I don't know, that they are living there, neighbors, relatives. And then when they tell a lot of story about how they misunderstood when they wanted to order something. Okay, so misunderstanding, if you do not understand a language, then it is not a shame if you say I do not understand. Would you kindly repeat that kind of things that you have just said now? I really didn't get it. Would you kindly help me in that way? Would you kindly help me in that idea? It is okay. It's always better to be misunderstood, It is always it is a good idea if you say, I do not understand. So what? You know, um, Actually, employees may have more difficulties when they communicate in English, which can lead to misunderstanding when taking direction, understanding level of urgency and communicating issues or concerns. So, as I said a while ago, if we want to be successful in communication, we need to be clear. We need to be clear as a blue sky. For example, if you have a problem, then say, I have a problem. If you cannot talk in English well, then they say, that's my line, that's the level of my proficiency. So that's okay. So try to use, your body language a lot if you are weak in that particular language. Okay, why? Because that's the only way to avoid misunderstanding. So even if other people say something wrong, then imagine, pretend that they do not know that language, and then if you interpret that message that way, then communication will be successful. But then if they make a mistakes, that doesn't mean that they want to bend that kind of value that you have. Okay, so maybe they don't know, maybe they didn't know how to use that expression appropriately, right? So imagine and interpret that way as if that they made a mistake. It was just a mistake, that's okay. And then if you interpret the message that way, then the communication will be successful. Okay, so the eighth barrier is norms and roles barrier. So when we talk about roles, actually, in every single culture, these roles are being assigned for a particular group in different culture. Norms are the culturally defined rules for determining the acceptable and appropriate behavior. So when we talk about norm, we talk about accepted behavior in a particular culture. For example, in our culture, it is a norm that, when you go to the university, you are not allowed to wear shorts, right? Maybe it is allowed to wear short in Europe. Okay, so I have seen some teachers when they teach at the university, they wear short. Okay, so this is like, it's not sensitive for them. So individual, they themselves frame rule for themselves and also expect others to do so. For example, there is a funeral there. Okay, so if I go there and wear a red shirt, then that means I disrespect that family. I disrespect that funeral, right? So that's why this is, this is a norm that was, set up by that culture. We need to understand the norm first. And then when you talk about, roles, for example, in some society like, Kurdish culture, okay? So women are assigned to take care about what? About children, right? They are supposed to be at home. They're supposed to be, I don't know, they have some particular job. For example, they are not allowed to go out at 1 a.m., right? But then actually this role has assigned to a male character. So if we need something at at 1 a.m., then I need to go out, not my sister, because in this culture, I have, this role was assigned for me, not my sister, for example, not for my mother. If we go out to the country, it is not easy to, for a female to go out of the country alone, right? Because this is a norm. And then if we talk about role, actually, for example, if a man in here, uh, you know, goes to the kitchen and then try to prepare food, and then if his friends see that person, and then they say, oh, you are just like a woman, why the hell you prepare food for the family and blah blah. Why? Because they think that this role has assigned only for the woman, right? So even the opposite is also correct. If a man stays at home and a female goes out to work, then people are saying the same things. Why? Because these roles have been assigned for a particular group in a particular situation. Okay, so we will talk about how to overcome these cultural barriers. Okay, so the first one is, maintaining etiquette. Many cultures have specific etiquette. Okay, so around the way they communicate. So before you meet, before you go to that culture, before you interact with that culture, research the target culture, try to learn about that target culture. Or if time allows, do some cross-cultural training. I mean, for instance, I want to go to Iran, then it would be always it would be great if you will get a training session with some Iranian people in here, or if there is a training course in here, to ask them some specific detail about Iran, and then so that I will not face any kind of problem. Then they will tell you, okay, do not do this, do not do that. You need to act that way. You need to behave that way. Okay, so this is really, really useful to do that. And then avoid slang. That's the second one. Okay, so not even the most educated non-native English speakers will have a comprehensive understanding of English slang. It would be always better to talk formally, even if you are in an informal place. If if you do not use slang or some inappropriate, I don't know, expression, then maybe people do not understand you. Maybe people do not accept what you say. So that's why, it would be always better to use full word and then try to be clear and concise when you want to deliver your message. And then the third one is speak slowly, okay? When you talk about speaking, sometimes there are people, when they talk, you do not understand what you say. So try to talk very gently and then try to use lots of nonverbal behaviors, nonverbal communication, so that the message can be delivered in an appropriate way, and then they will, they know how to interpret what you have just said. And then the fourth one is keep it simple. In cross-cultural communication, there is no need to make it harder for both of you by using big words, complicated phrases, expression, idioms, this kind of stuff. Try to be simple. What exactly you want to deliver? What exactly you want to get to know? Why you want to know this? So try to be simple. Do not make it complicated, okay? So try to be as simple as that. The next one is practice active listening. Active listening is a very effective strategy for improving cross-cultural communication. Restate or summarize, what other person has just said. We talked about, decoding and encoding. In order to understand, when someone talks to you, if you summarize what they have just said, then they will be very happy, and then they would be in love to elaborate what they want to tell you. Okay, but then if someone talks to you and you say, and then you look at the sky, and then you sometimes do something like this, and then sometimes you look at your watch, and then sometimes when someone talks to you, and then you are just scrolling your phone, and then that doesn't serve the communication process. Okay, so try to listen carefully. When someone talks to you and then listen to you and then do something like this, nodding their head, that means they understand what you say, right? And then take turns to talk. This is really, really important. So make the conversation flow more freely by taking it in turns to speak. Sometimes a person wants to talk a lot, and then they talk a lot, and they do not give the other person a time to respond, a time to add something, a time to ask. Imagine that you talk for someone for, I don't know, 3 consecutive minutes, and then you have not provided a space, to them to ask something. Maybe they didn't get a message, and then you need to give them a space to respond, right? So when they respond, actually, maybe they will give you a feedback, maybe they didn't understand something well, and then they will give you an immediate response, and then you can clarify, and then so on. The next point is writing things down. If you are not sure whether other person has understood you properly, write it down to make sure. This can be particularly helpful when discussing large figure. For example, imagine you go somewhere and then 3 different people, they talk at the same time. Maybe you are in a conference, maybe you are in an informal place. Then it's okay if you take notes. One of the interesting things that I learned in Malaysia was, when I was in my first class, they always has a pen in their hand. Whatever you say, they write it down somewhere. That was really interesting. In my first class, it was just an introduction for the class. And then I was just sitting, and I, looked at the teacher, and then she was explaining the class, and I was just like, and the other students, I realized that they all take notes, okay? And then when I was talking, even they are just taking notes as well. So this is a kind of things that, it gives you, it gives you a sense of respect. And when you see other people take notes while you're talking, it's a very nice feeling, okay? And then avoid closed question. Don't phrase a question that needs a yes or no. answer. In many cultures, it is different or embarrassing to answer in the negative. So you will always get a yes, even if the real answer is no. So ask open-ended question that requires information and response instead. It's like it would be always better when you ask a question, it would be better to be, open-ended question. At that time, they can elaborate, they can go beyond the limitation. They can just elaborate as much as they want. Sometimes they add something that you never think about. Okay, so that's why yes no question is not a good idea. Do you love pizza? Yes. So what? Then it would be, but what kind of pizza do you like? Why you like it? Why you don't like it? So that they give you more detail. For example, they say, okay, I love spicy pizza. Why? Because in my culture, blah 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 blah. So they give you more detail. Okay, and then be careful with humor. This is really important. So many cultures take business very seriously and believe in behaving professional and following protocol at all times. So consequently, they do not appreciate the use of humor and jokes in business context. So last time I still remember I talked about this. In Egypt, when they have a session, it was working for an agency in Egypt. Sometimes they laugh a lot during the session, and then they say, ha 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 ha, while they're discussing an important point. But then in the US, they never laugh in a professional meeting. Why? Because this is really, really important for them. So it is quite important to be careful when and where you crack a joke, or maybe you say something funny. So that's why you need to be very careful when you want to laugh, when you want to say something funny. If the meeting is formal, then be careful. If you are with your friends, then be careful. Then when you are with a different family, then be careful. You need to assess the situation and then act. And then be supportive. Effective cross-cultural communication is about all parties feeling comfortable. In any conversation with a non-native English speaker, treat them with respect. When we talk about respect, actually respect can be shown when they talk, you need to listen. When they talk to you, then you need to give an appropriate response. Okay, so do your best to communicate clearly and give them encouragement when they respond. This will build their confidence and trust in you. So when you say, oh good, that was really good, and then oh yeah, when you nod your head, when you say something supportive, and then that makes them to talk to you more. That helps them, that makes them to accommodate more than what you expect. So that's why you need to be supportive in communication. Okay, so thank you very much, dears, for the class. I really hope you enjoyed this virtual class. And then if you have any questions so far, you can either contact me through my email or my WhatsApp number. I think you all have my WhatsApp number. And then if you have any questions so far, you can write it down below, or you can, as I said, email me. You can reach me, in any channel that you like to reach me. And then if you have any questions so far, do not hesitate to let me know immediately, okay? So thank you very much and enjoy your study. Bye-bye. Have a good night. Bye-bye.